is this is something that is important, and it's fard for everyone who reaches the age where the laws of Islam become binding on them, from the point that they're accountable, which is when they have become baligh, when they've reached puberty. It's not a topic that is only important for those who have graduated college and are starting to work, or have been in the field, or who are older, or such. It's for everyone, just like salah needs to be trained. Like, you have to train your children and you have to teach them about salah, so that when they are reach the age where they're now accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning if they don't do it, there's potential accountability for it in the hereafter. By that time, they already know. And they know the importance, they know the rulings. Zakat it's similar in that sense that it is also fard. And it is also something that people can be questioned about in the hereafter. I went to, I won't say the name, but I went to one of the premier Ivy League universities in the country. And I did a session similar to this on the fiqh of zakat at this university. And this is now from like the academic field, if you will. These are students who are like the top students, right? They're the cream of the crop, if you will. And what was interesting was, at the end of that session, I had so many students who came up to me afterward and said that we never realized that we should have been giving zakat for all these years. Because we just assumed that because we are college students, and in many cases our parents are paying for our education, and we're not working yet, we didn't even think about zakat. But these are people who had money, either because money that their parents gave them, or they had money because they were doing side jobs, or whatnot, but they had enough money that they actually were obligated to give zakat. They're beyond the age where they're accountable in Islam, but because they weren't working, they completely weren't even thinking about zakat. And now they have to go back, and many of them said, okay, now we have to go back and redo we have to calculate several years of zakat now, because we realize we should have been paying since we were 17, 18, or 14, 15 in some cases, and we're now at 21, and now we're just learning that, we should have been giving zakat this entire time. So this is something that's an important topic, that we have to ensure that it's not only for the working class of people, that even our children, many of us give our children money, we put money in their accounts and so on. When they are Islamically adults, they may be zakat rulings may be applicable to them. It is our responsibility to ensure that they're aware of those rulings, just like we are accountable to ensure they're aware of how to do their wudu and how to do their salah and so on. Likewise. And before we jump right into it, one of the other things I also want to mention is that we're talking about the fiqh of zakat, and anytime you have a fiqhi topic, then there's going to be certain issues that may be matters of disagreements between certain ulama. Ulama may have different opinions on a particular matter. If there's something that we cover here, and you have heard that from some reliable scholar that you follow regularly, and you heard them say something different, you can continue to follow them as long as you follow their whatever they say consistently, and you can follow them. Okay? I acknowledge up front that there may be certain matters that different opinions may exist out there. Now, start first with just the definition of zakat. Now, zakat, the word zakat has a linguistic meaning. In the Arabic language, there's a linguistic meaning for it, which means blessings, purification, praise. And then it has a legal definition of it. So within the Sharia, then the legal definition of it. And I want you to pay attention to this definition, because every word here serves a purpose. So it is the transfer of ownership of a portion of one's wealth to a deserving individual with its intention. Okay. Every word here has a purpose. So first, it is the transfer of ownership, meaning that it is a complete transfer of this was previously mine, and now I've completely given over to somebody else. It is now completely their ownership, no strings attached. Okay? Meaning I cannot give zakat to someone and say, here, I'm going to give you zakat, but you must only use it for this purpose. Or that instead of giving you the zakat, I'm just going to use this, and you know what, I won't give it to you, but I'll use it to pay your rent, but I won't give it to you. That's not a complete transfer of ownership. A complete transfer of ownership is, it was mine, it is no longer mine, it is now 100% yours, you can do with it as you wish. That's a transfer of ownership. Also, there's other virtuous acts, like for example, if you set up a soup kitchen and people are welcome to come in and eat. Technically, you're giving them permission to eat, but that's not necessarily giving it under their ownership. Or if there's disaster somewhere and tents are set up. Now these are temporary tents, temporary shelters that people will stay in, and then thereafter they'll move out of it, and then you'll take the tents back. That's not a transfer of ownership. Okay? So that is not a valid use of zakat. Zakat must be complete transfer of ownership. You don't have any right over it. It is now permanently theirs. Of a portion of one's wealth. Okay? So a portion here, 2.5% of what we would refer to as the net zakatable assets. We'll talk about what net zakatable assets are, inshallah. To a deserving individual. Okay. So first is deserving. We'll talk about who is eligible to receive zakat. But the other thing here is it's a deserving individual. Okay. A person, an individual, a person. It's not a masjid. It is not an institution. It's not public welfare. Okay. The end recipient of the zakat must be a deserving individual. Yes, a masjid, because like if I'm giving zakat, maybe I don't know who are the deserving people in the community. The masjid will know, people will come to the masjid. The masjid may have a zakat box, but the masjid isn't the end recipient of that zakat. They're just simply collecting on our behalf to give it to the deserving individuals. Okay? But that end recipient, who will actually consume the zakat, must be a deserving individual, not an organization, not an institution, not a masjid. With its intention. Okay? With its intention. Okay? The intention must be at the time of giving zakat. So when you're giving zakat, you have to have the intention that I'm giving this money as zakat. Okay? You don't have to tell the person you're giving the money to that it's zakat. So sometimes the person may feel bad if you tell them it's zakat. So they may say, oh, can I borrow money? And you say, sure, here, take this money, you can pay me back later, we'll figure it out later. But in your heart, the intention is, this is zakat. That's fine. You don't have to tell them it's zakat, but your heart, and you must know that this is zakat. Okay? If it's zakat time and you realize, you know what, a few months ago I had given that money, let me just consider that as my zakat now. You can't. Okay? At the time when you're giving that money, you must have the intention that this is zakat. So it's a transfer of ownership of a portion of one's wealth to a deserving individual with its intention. And the ruling here is that, this is the third pillar of Islam. This is an individual obligation that must be fulfilled without delay. Okay, this is something that became fard in the second year after Hijrah, and it is necessary to give your zakat without any delay. Sometimes people will ask, can I, instead of giving all my zakat at once, can I just give it a little bit, month after month after month? If you did that, know that your zakat isn't fulfilled until that last payment has been made. And if anything happens, if a person passes away, they would have passed away without having fulfilled that obligation. You have to ensure that someone after you knows that you had this obligation that was yet unfulfilled. Okay, so it's best to fulfill this obligation as soon as possible. The other thing I want to call out here is, this is an individual obligation. Okay, just like your salah is an individual obligation, your sawm is an individual obligation, your hajj is an individual obligation, zakat is an individual obligation, meaning it is fard on the husband and it is fard on the wife. It is not fard on them as a couple. It's fard on both of them individually. What that means is that the husband is going to do his own zakat calculation. The wife will do her own zakat calculation. Okay? What happens sometimes is the husband and the wife will pool their wealth together, and they'll calculate zakat on top of that. Okay? And usually what happens is when people create, when they have joint assets or they have like joint bank accounts, okay? Within US law, if you open up a joint bank account, okay, they will look at that as being 100% of the husband and 100% of the wife as well. Okay? Islamically, that doesn't work. Okay? The percentages have to add up to 100%. And the problem is, one, in zakat, okay, if you have a joint bank account and you have $5,000 in there, who owns that $5,000? It can't be 100% owned by the husband and 100% owned by the wife. There must be some portion that is the husband's and some portion that's the wife's. You have to have that clarity. Otherwise, how are you going to calculate the zakat? When it's time to calculate zakat, husband needs to know how much of that am I including and how much is the wife including. The other problem is something happens, let's say a husband passes away. Civic law will just say, oh, the wife now gets 100% of that bank balance. Why? Because it was jointly owned. She was already 100% owner in his lifetime as well, and now so she's going to keep 100% of that. Islamically, that doesn't work. You need to now have the laws of inheritance that need to apply in the husband's share of that wealth. Okay? So if you have joint accounts, you have to have clarity on how much is owned by each individual. Okay? And you need to then include that within your individual zakat calculation. Now, once you do your individual zakat calculation, if the wife, for example, wants that their husband pays her zakat, or if the husband wants to pay his wife's zakat, and there's permission from the wife, okay, like you'll get permission. Okay? If you get permission from the wife, then yes, the husband can pay the zakat on behalf of the wife, but it was calculated on the wife's wealth, and it was the wife's obligation. The husband could give it on her behalf if he wants and she accepts. But if he doesn't want to, it's not his obligation, it is the wife's obligation. Okay? It's an individual obligation. Okay? We won't go into like some of the virtues of zakat and some of the wisdoms of it and some of the societal benefits we see of it. Just in the interest of time, we're going to keep this to more of a sort of ruling-based approach. Okay? Now, zakatable assets. Many of you know the concept of revenue minus expenses equals profit. Okay, so you have your top line, you have your bottom, and then you get to your net. Okay? We'll adopt a similar concept when calculating zakat. So you have, let's say, your zakatable assets minus your valid debts and expenses equal your net zakatable assets. Okay, and then you give 2.5% of the net zakatable assets. Okay, so we'll follow that formula, if you will. Okay? The other thing also is when you're giving zakat, this is how you calculate. You sum up all of your zakatable assets and you subtract all of your valid debts and expenses, and then you get to one net number, and it's 2.5% of that. Okay? So if a person has multiple different assets, you're not trying to calculate zakat on each one individually. So you're not saying how much zakat on my cash, and then how much zakat on my gold, and then how much zakat on my stocks, and so on. All of that's going to get added together. You'll get a total zakatable assets value, and then you'll subtract all of your valid debts and expenses. You get to a net number, and it's 2.5% of that. So the first zakatable asset here is cash. It's perhaps the most obvious one of them all. This is cash, whether you have it in hand, right? So you have it in your pocket, you have it in your bank, or you have given it to somebody to borrow, like you have loaned it to someone, and you're expecting to be paid back. In all of those cases, that cash is a zakatable asset. Second, and inshallah we'll take questions at the end. Inshallah, we'll take questions at the end. I see there's questions coming in on, I believe it's the Slido. We'll answer all the questions at the end, inshallah. Okay? Second is on your investments, so your stocks. Okay, so whatever you've invested into the market to buy, in the stocks that you've bought, with the hope that you've bought these stocks and then the value will go up. You will sell them. There will be capital gains. right? All those stocks are zakatable assets. The other investment is your 401k. And now in 401k, there's a little bit of detail. In 401k, you have two components. You have the employee contribution, and then you have the employer match or the employer contribution. Okay, so I put in a certain amount of money, and then my employer will match based off whatever the company rules are. Okay, so there is an employee contribution and an employer contribution. 100% of the employee contribution is a zakatable asset, right? This was my money that I put into this account. Okay, that's a zakatable. That's zakatable. You include that within your zakatable assets. The employee contribution. Within the employer contribution, there's two possibilities. Either that employer contribution is vested, or it is unvested or not vested. What that means is, if it's vested, if I left the company and I went somewhere else, all that money that the employer contributed to my 401k, I get to keep with me. I get to take with me. Okay? And if it's not vested, what that means is then if I left the company, I don't get to keep that money that the employer contributed. Okay? A company may have policy that say that our matching will only vest after 1 year, for example. So if you left before 1 year of employment, you don't get to keep what the employer was matching. Okay? If you don't get to keep what the employer is matching, if it's not vested, then that's a sign that that money is not owned by you. Right? If it was your ownership, they can't take it away from you. So if it's not vested, that means you don't own it. If you don't own it, then you don't pay zakat on it. Okay? If it's vested, meaning you get to keep it, then it is your ownership. You have to then include that within your zakatable assets. So within a 401k, all the employee contribution is a zakatable asset always, and the vested portion of the employer contribution is also part of the zakatable asset. So you include employee contribution and employer contribution if it is vested. Okay. Now there's questions around like early withdrawal penalty and taxes. Inshallah, we'll get to that when we talk about the other side of the equation on the subtractions. We'll have that discussion there. But for now, know that all the employee contribution and all the vested employer contribution is part of the zakatable assets. Gold and silver, okay? Regardless of whether it's in use or this is in the safe deposit box, and no one really it's not being used, it doesn't matter. It's still a zakatable asset that you own. So whether you wear it or you don't wear it, okay, gold and silver are zakatable assets. Okay? Property. Okay? There's different types of properties. Resale property is a zakatable asset. And what we mean by resale property is property that you bought with the intention of resale, and you're still holding on to it with that intention. Okay? That's a resale property. So for example, someone's in the business of flipping homes. Okay? So you bought this house, okay, bought a foreclosed house, and the intention is I'm going to fix it up and resell it. Okay? That property is a resale property. It was bought with the intention of resale. It is currently being held with the intention of resale. Okay, it's a zakatable asset. It's like business inventory. We'll talk about business inventory, but that's sort of what it's like. Okay, so this is a zakatable asset. Okay, if the property wasn't bought for resale, if it's bought to lease out, for example, so a person bought a property, investment property, and their intention is I'm going to Airbnb this, okay, or I'm going to put it on verbal. I'm going to lease it out. Or a person bought an apartment building. They own an apartment building, and the goal there is to lease the apartments out. Okay, this is not a resale property. Okay, it's a leasing property, or it's a vacation home, for example. So I'm going to buy a house in Florida, and in the summers I'll go live there. Okay? This is not a resale property. Okay? So those are not zakatable assets. Okay? Only resale property is a zakatable asset. Yes, property that you put up on lease, you'll collect income on it. That'll be cash. We already talked about cash as a zakatable asset. Okay? But property, only if it's a resale property, will be a zakatable assets. Because if you bought a home, your personal home, maybe at the time when you bought the house, your intention was, let's buy a house in this area, like the property values are expected to go up, and someday we'll sell it. But right now, that house is meant for what? To live in it. Right? So that is not a resale property. Resale property is property bought with the intention of resale and held with the intention of resale at the moment. The same applies for other assets. So if someone's in the business of buying cars on auction and then reselling them to individuals, whatever other assets, same way, if you bought an asset with the intention of resale, then it is also a zakatable asset. Okay. Business inventory. Okay. So think of this as whatever goes on the shelf. Okay. So if a person has a business and they sell, let's say they sell toys. Okay. So you have the individual toys, and it needs to go in a plastic, and the plastic will go within a cardboard box. Okay. That toy, the plastic, the card, all these things come together, and that's what goes on the shelf. Right? So all of that are zakatable assets. You will have to take their value, and that'll be a zakatable asset. Okay? But not machinery, not the property, not the warehouse. These are not business inventory. Right? They don't go on the shelf, if you will. Okay? So those are not zakatable assets. But the actual product that goes on the shelf and everything that forms part of it is going to be a zakatable asset. And then finally, cryptocurrencies. The Al-Ifta has a detailed fatwa on which types of cryptocurrencies are permissible, which ones are not. We're not, for the purpose of this session, we're not going to get into it. But if someone does have cryptocurrencies, okay, then though the cryptocurrencies don't have any intrinsic value, right? Their only purpose that people buy them is with the expectation that its value is going to go up and you're going to sell them, make money off of it, or it's sort of used like cash, where in certain cases you can convert that for other business other products, if you will. But nonetheless, their only purpose is that you buy them to trade them for something else, either sell them and get cash in return, or use it to buy a product from some website. Okay? So those are going to be considered as zakatable assets. Their value will be considered as a zakatable asset. So this is now all of your zakatable assets. From here, then you have to subtract your debts. Okay? Now within debts, there's valid debts you can subtract, okay? And then there's some invalid debts that you cannot subtract. Okay? So valid subtractions. Valid subtractions are any debt that is a right of other people. Okay? Debts of other people. So for example, you have a loan that you owe somebody, okay? Or you have unpaid zakat, because zakat is a right of poor Muslims. It is their right. So if a person has any unpaid zakat, that is a valid subtraction in your calculation. Second here is debts that are due within 1 year. So if a person has long-term debts, okay? So this is if a person has their house financed or their car financed, right? Presumably Islamically financed, right? Then it may be a 15-year financing plan or a 30-year finance plan. Okay? You don't subtract the entire 15 years. You don't subtract the entire 30 years. You only subtract what is going to be demanded from you between now and the next zakat year. So up to 1 year, what is going to be demanded from you? And the only thing that financing company can demand from you is up to that 1 year worth of payment, right? So you look at, if a person, for example, easy math, let's say they have to give $2,000 a month in their home payments, then you can subtract $24,000. Okay? What is due within the next 12 months between now and the next zakat date? You can subtract that, not beyond that, not the entire 15 years, 30 years, or whatever. Okay. I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So any debts that are due up to 1 year. Okay. Third item on here is incurred expenses. Okay. So any expense that has been incurred now is due on you, even if you didn't get the bill for it at the moment, for example. Okay. So let's say your zakat date was today. Okay. Earlier, yesterday, you put things in your credit card. Okay, so you swiped your credit card, you paid for gas, you paid for groceries, you paid for things. Okay? all of those expenses have been incurred. You owe that money, like today, that is a debt on you. Yes, the credit card bill may come in 2 weeks and you may have, a month to pay, but as of today, all of these expenses have been incurred already. Okay? So they are valid subtractions. Okay? Property taxes. Okay? Property taxes are paid in arrears. Okay? So you don't pay for the future, you pay for the past. Okay? So any property tax that a person is due, maybe like they're going to get their property tax payment statement in a couple months from now. But they've already lived in the house last year. They already owe those taxes, even if the bill hasn't come in the mail yet. Okay, so this is an incurred expense. This is a valid subtraction. Okay? Compare those against invalid subtractions. Invalid subtractions are, for example, savings that a person has put aside for a noble purpose. A person says, I've set this money aside because I need that money to buy a house, to pay for my kids' college, to pay for my kids' wedding, to go for Hajj, for whatever noble purpose a person may have put that money aside. Okay? That's just their intention of how they're going to use their wealth. Okay? But they own that wealth still. So that is still going to be a zakatable asset. You cannot subtract that in your calculation. Okay? The other thing that you cannot subtract is anything that is a potential expense. Okay? It hasn't been incurred yet. It could be incurred, okay? But it may not be incurred, or it may be incurred sometime in the future, but it hasn't been incurred today. Okay? That cannot be subtracted. Okay? So let me come back to the 401k aspect. Okay? In a 401k, it's a deferred, it's a tax savings plan, right? So you put money in now, you don't have to pay taxes. You will pay taxes, when you withdraw from that at retirement. Technically speaking, though, if you wanted to withdraw from your 401k today, well ahead of retirement, you can. You can. But it's generally a bad financial idea to do so because you will have to pay the taxes and there's going to be a penalty on top of it. Okay? So the first thing that sometimes people confuse is that people say, oh, I don't have access to my 401k today. That's inaccurate. People do have access to their 401ks. It's just that it's not a good financial advice that you withdraw your 401k ahead of retirement. Okay? Now, if a person withdraws from their 401k, then there will be a penalty. There will be taxes. However, today, if a person has not withdrawn from their 401k, then that penalty remains as a potential expense. You haven't incurred it. You will incur it if you withdraw. But if you don't withdraw, then you haven't incurred it. Okay? Likewise, taxes, okay? That you will incur it when you withdraw it. Okay? But you haven't withdrawn it now, and you haven't incurred that expense now. Okay? So let me give an example. Let's say if I go for Umrah, okay, and my zakat date is today. And if I'm in Makkah Mukarramah, I say, okay, in my account, right, just taking small numbers here, but let's say in my account I have $1,000. And I say, well, if I want to wire that money over to Makkah Mukarramah, then there's going to be a $50 wiring fee. So I'm going to pay zakat on 1,000 minus 50. I'm going to pay zakat on $950. But I haven't actually brought my money over. I'm going to say my zakat calculation will be on $950. And then I come back to the US and I still have $1,000 in my bank account. Why would I calculate zakat on 950? Right? It's just a potential expense that could be incurred, but actually was never incurred. Right? So I should be paying zakat on the actual money that I have, which is $1,000. Yes, if I did wire the money over and I lost 50 from it, then yes, I would give zakat on 950. But I never wired it over, and I still have 1,000, but I'm only going to calculate zakat on 950. Right? That is not correct. Likewise, for your 401k, if you withdraw from it, yes, the taxes will be subtracted, the penalty will be subtracted, like that will go out from your 401k, right? Like that's going to get incurred. But if you haven't actually incurred it, then it remains as a potential expense or some future expense that cannot be subtracted now. Okay, so you will include the full 401k balance. You will not subtract these potential or future expenses that have not actually been incurred. Okay. Okay. So once you have all your zakatable assets, then you have these debts and expenses. Then you get to your net zakatable amount. If that net zakatable amount, okay, meets the nisab, right, the quantum, the minimum threshold you need to have, then you will have to give zakat 2.5% of that. Okay? And zakat is given, and the calculation is done every year. Okay? When we say every year, every Islamic year, lunar year. Okay? So 4th of Ramadan to 4th of Ramadan. Okay? 27th Ramadan, 27th Ramadan. Or 8th of Shawwal to 8th of Shawwal. Any of those are fine, but not my birthday to my birthday, January 1st to January 1st, or because that calendar, the Gregorian calendar, is longer than the Islamic calendar. You cannot do, I'll just give it on the first of the, I'll give it on January 1st of the year. You cannot do that. Okay? Likewise, the way that this calculation is going to be done is sort of like like a balance sheet. It's as of today. Okay? So as of the date when zakat, when your zakat date is, it's as of that date. So you cannot say I pay zakat in Ramadan. Okay? It has to be a specific date in Ramadan, because it can't be that last year you paid on the 1st Ramadan, this year you're going to pay on the 18th of Ramadan, next year then you pay on the 4th of Ramadan, right? There's a date, a specific date, and it's what money you have on that date. Okay? What money you have on that date. Okay? Now, let's say you do the calculation. Okay? So then how do we know who is liable to give zakat? Okay? First, zakat is only on sane adult Muslims, so those who have the mental faculties, and somebody who is an adult. And by adult, again, we mean someone who has reached puberty. Islamically, they're an adult, not 18, 21, are now working or such. Islamically, if they're an adult. Okay? And then there's, you have to have the nisab, which is about 87.48 grams of gold. The actual value of it will fluctuate year to year depending on the value of gold. I think as of maybe like a month ago or so when I had looked, it was roughly around like $7,500 was the quantum of the minimum threshold that you need to have. So once you did all your additions and then you did your subtractions, that bottom line has to be above 7,500 for you to be liable to give zakat. Okay? I don't know what the exact value is today. I mean, it fluctuates, but it's in that range. Okay? Fluctuations during the year are ignored. Okay? I want to explain a concept that people generally get confused over, which is the 1 year rule. Okay, what does the 1 year rule mean? Okay, you need to have something for a year. What that means is that that first time somebody had enough money that they were liable for zakat, okay, the first time they met the threshold, from that point to 1 year onward, okay, if they still had that threshold, now they've had that for 1 year, they need to pay zakat. Okay? Likewise, last year if you paid zakat, and now this year, so last year you met the threshold for being liable to give zakat, and now 1 year later this year you have again met the threshold, the liability to give zakat, you are liable to give zakat. Okay? You've met the criteria for 1 year. You had the criteria last year, and now 1 year later you meet that criteria still. Okay? That's the 1 year rule, if you will. Okay? The fluctuations that happen throughout the year don't matter. So last year you started with, let's say, $10,000. It went to 11,000, 12,000, 15,000. Then you paid property taxes. It went to 6,000, and then went up again. The ups and downs during the year don't matter. Okay? It doesn't matter. Okay? People say, oh, like I got this check, but do I need to wait for 1 year? No. it's as of that date. So if your zakat date is today how much do you have? So if you got bonus check yesterday, it's included because you have it today. Or if you made a big payment yesterday and you paid property taxes and you paid $10,000 in property taxes yesterday, well, today you don't have it. Okay? So it is as of that date when you have to calculate your zakat. Okay? So it's as of today, let's say. If your zakat date is today, it is as of today. The fluctuations during the year doesn't matter. Okay? Another important point is a person's liability is not contingent on liquidity. Okay? Liability is not contingent on liquidity. And I'll give you two practical examples of this. One, for women, sometimes what happens is they would say, well, I don't have a lot of cash on hand, but they have a lot of gold. They have gold and silver. Okay? So they have sufficient wealth that they need to give zakat, but they say, but the actual cash on hand that I have is more limited. Okay? That's a matter of liquidity. Okay? It's not a matter of ownership or wealth. Okay? So your liability is not going to drop off because you don't have the liquidity for it. Okay? Otherwise, people will just take all their cash and convert it into gold and say, I don't have to give zakat. Okay? Likewise, the other practical challenge that happens for people is, mashallah, people's 401k balances grow over the year to a point where, mashallah, there's so much in there that if you were to, if you calculate the zakat on it, the amount that you need to give, people don't have that much liquidity on hand, where people generally will, spend most of their money. Okay, so this is why a savings plan is so important for people, because people naturally don't save a lot of money. They spend whatever they have. So a lot of times people don't have a lot of liquidity on hand, but they have a lot of money in their 401k. Okay? That does not drop a person's liability to give zakat. Okay? Now, what a person could do in that situation is if a person says, you know what, I don't have the liquidity to pay zakat on my 401k, so I'm going to give as much zakat as I can, and then the 401k amount of zakat that I need to give, I'm going to defer that amount. Okay? You can do that if needed. But again, you are still calculating and keeping track of how much I have to give. So what's going to happen is you say, last year I needed to give, say $1,000 in zakat from my 401k balance, and I didn't. This year, what you're going to do is say, okay, I have 100,000 in my 401k minus the unpaid zakat from last year. I had to give 1,000 last year, I didn't give it. So this year, it's 100,000 minus 1,000. Okay? So it's going to be $99,000 that I'm going to say, okay, I need to give zakat on 99,000, and whatever that amount is, if you don't pay, next year what's going to happen is you're going to say, okay, I have 130,000 in 401k minus the 1,000 that I need to pay from that first year, and then whatever 2.5% of 99,000 is from this year. Both of those get subtracted. Okay? So every year you're going to subtract the zakat that you didn't pay for each of the prior years. Okay? People will sometimes do wrong math here and say, if I don't pay and I pay after 10 years, then I'll pay 25% of my 401k. Okay? That math is incorrect. It doesn't work that way, because every year you are subtracting the unpaid zakat from the prior year. Okay? Now, eligibility to receive zakat. Who is eligible to receive zakat? Okay. If a person is not liable to give zakat, then are they automatically eligible to receive zakat? No, not necessarily. Why? Okay. Because the way that you calculate is slightly different. Okay? So remember when we said, when you're doing your zakat calculation, we said add up all of your zakatable assets, right? We didn't say add up all of your assets. We said add up all of your zakatable assets. So we said there are certain assets that may be valuable, but they're not zakatable, right? So for example, if a person has an apartment building, okay, we said, or a vacation home, or an Airbnb property or such, we said those are not zakatable assets. But those are assets that are beyond one's essential needs. Okay? So to determine eligibility of zakat, you're going to add up all of the assets that are above your essential needs. So your home that you live in is an essential need. But a vacation home or an Airbnb property or an apartment building, these are beyond essential needs. You're going to include all of that in the wealth that you have. Okay? And then you do your subtractions as usual, and then you get to a number. And if that number is below that threshold of nisab, then you're going to have to, then you are eligible to receive. Otherwise, you are not eligible to receive. Okay? So just remember that for zakat liability, you include all of the zakatable assets. To determine eligibility, you have to add up all the non-essential assets. Okay? And again, the same thing applies for eligibility as well, which is that lack of liquidity doesn't mean someone is eligible to receive zakat. Okay? And again, it's the same scenario that happens where sometimes people have relatives, especially overseas, and they say, well, this person doesn't have a lot of cash, but they do have gold jewelry. Okay? If that person has gold jewelry and that puts them above that threshold, then they're not eligible to receive zakat. Just because they don't have liquidity doesn't mean they're eligible to receive zakat. You can help them. You can still help them with sadaqah. You can still help them, just out of goodwill and non-zakat ways. But zakat is very specific, and lack of eligibility or lack of liquidity doesn't mean that a person is going to be eligible to receive zakat. Okay. Now, who are eligible recipients? Okay. The ayah I mentioned in the beginning from Surah Tawbah, verse 60, mentions different categories of people. Okay. We're going to talk about them, but we're going to just change the order and reorganize it slightly different, just for ease in categorization, ease in remembrance. Okay? So first, when we're talking about the eligible recipients, was known as the faqir. Okay? The faqir is an indigent person, a poor person, possessing less than nisab. Okay? Important to know here, a poor person doesn't mean they don't have any money. They can still have money. But if they have money that is less than the nisab, then they're considered poor and they're eligible to receive zakat. Okay, that's a faqir. The Quran mentions different categories, and they're different, if you will, levels of poverty. So the first one is, the Quran talks about fuqara. Okay? Then the Quran talks about masakin, the miskin. The miskin is also a poor person, but this person doesn't have any money. So if a person looked at all their money above their essential needs minus all of their debts and expenses, and they came to that net amount, for the faqir it is above zero but below nisab. For the miskin it is at zero. Okay? It's flat. They don't have anything. And then you have the debtor, wal gharimin. Okay? These are now people, when you do their calculation, they're in the negatives. Okay? So they owe more debts in debt than they actually have in assets. Okay? So all three of these, they're all from our generic usage, poor. Okay, but there's different levels within that. Okay? But they're all eligible recipients. Then you have the Ibn Sabil. Now the Ibn Sabil is a wayfarer who is wealthy in their homeland, but poor on their journey. So let me give you a practical example. Okay? Somebody who is alhamdulillah well off goes on vacation to a foreign country, and Allah forbid, they're robbed. Their wallet is taken, their purse is taken, all of their wealth is taken, their passport stolen. Okay? Now in that state, in that foreign country, whatever amount of money they have here in the US is irrelevant, because it's of no benefit to them whatsoever. Right? In that state, they don't have passport, they don't have any money on them, they don't have anything. In that state, they're considered as an eligible recipient of zakat. If somebody wanted to help them out of zakat, they can help them out of zakat. They're an eligible recipient. Okay? Why? Because this person, even if they may have wealth, has now been cut off from access to that wealth. Okay, so practically speaking, it's like they don't have any wealth. Another similar category of that, just like we talked about within the poor category, there's similar types of people. Within this person who's been cut off, who's been cut off from access to their wealth, are similar types of people. One is this wayfarer, and the other one is what the Quran talks about as fi sabilillah. Okay? The Muslim, this directly quoted in the path of Allah. This is the Muslim soldier who is cut off from his troops. Okay? So when this soldier is with the troops, okay, then they are taken care of. They have whatever they need. But then if they're cut off from their troops, then now they've lost access to anything. So they're similar to that wayfarer that we're talking about. Okay? So this person is also eligible recipient. And I want to clarify here that this is the category that is known as fi sabilillah or fi sabilillah, in the path of Allah. Sometimes people take the direct English translation of in the path of Allah, and people use this in all sorts of ways. Okay? And I can give examples of like ways that I either know of directly or I know of secondhand, like through somebody else, that zakat's been used as this generic categorization of it's being used for good purposes in the path of Allah, for good purposes, where zakat was used for interfaith events, zakat was used for putting up billboards, okay? Zakat was used for thank you parties to staff. Zakat was used, and this is perhaps the most egregious one, to contribute toward building an MLK statue, okay? Building a statue which is in itself not permissible, of a non-Muslim. And that's zakat being used for that. Okay? This category of fi sabilillah doesn't mean anything that you have a good intention for. Okay, the phrase of fi sabilillah in the Quran is used often, and it's meant somebody who's striving in the path of Allah, meaning they're going out in battle in the path of Allah. That's what this is referring to. Okay? So these are eligible recipients. Then you have certain recipients that the Quran talks about. They're just in our time and place, they're inapplicable. Okay? So the Quran talks about wal-amilin. Okay? This was now the official state zakat collector. Okay? So the official Muslim state appointed a person whose job was to collect zakat. Okay? That person was also a recipient to consume from that zakat as well. Okay? We don't have that here. Okay? We don't have a Muslim government here to appoint an official Muslim zakat collector. Okay? Anybody who sets up an organization to collect zakat doesn't fall under this category. Okay? I mean, otherwise, me, you, everybody here, like we can go register an LLC and set up, an organization to collect zakat and start to consume from that zakat. Okay? It doesn't work that way. This is the official Muslim state's zakat collector. Okay? So in our time, or at least for us here in the US, it's inapplicable. Okay? The other is wafir riqab. Okay? The slave who is working towards their freedom. Okay? We don't have those slaves here. It's inapplicable. Okay? And third is وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةُ قُلُوبُهُم, those whose hearts are to be reconciled. Okay? Initially, the Prophet gave certain people from zakat to keep them firm and to keep them within the fold of Islam. But since the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, the Sahaba had agreed that they said that this was when Islam was weak, and now Islam has strengthened, and that this is no longer needed anymore. Okay? Meaning this is what is, not to get technical, but this is what's known as intifal hukm bi intifal illa, that the ruling has ceased because the cause for that ruling has ceased. The ruling existed because when Islam was weak, and then the Sahaba radiallahu anhu in the time of Abu Bakr said that that is no longer the case. Now Islam has strengthened, and that cause no longer exists. So the ruling that is built upon that cause will no longer exist as well. Okay, so they said we will no longer give in this category. And then you have certain recipients who are ineligible. You cannot give them zakat, or at least they are ineligible for you. You cannot give them zakat. They could take zakat from somebody else, but not from you. Okay? First is your ascendants. Okay? So if you think of a family tree, these are people who are going above you. Okay? Your father, mother, okay? Father's parents, mother's parents, and so on. Okay? Your ascendants. Likewise, if you think of that family tree, those who are directly below you. Okay? Your sons, your daughters, your sons' children, your daughter's children, okay? Your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on, they're ineligible for your zakat. Okay? Third, spouse. Okay? So husband cannot give zakat to his wife, wife cannot give zakat to her husband. Okay? The husband has a responsibility to support his wife. Okay? He cannot do it from his zakat. Okay? And likewise, because the husband has a responsibility to financially support the wife, if the wife gives zakat to her husband, the husband is going to use that zakat to do what? Support the wife, right? So the money will just kind of come back to her own benefit. So the husband cannot give to the wife cannot give to the husband. Okay? It cannot be given to somebody who is a Hashimi. Okay? Hashemite, sometimes in some of our cultures referred to as a Sayyid, okay? Meaning somebody who's truly from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. They should be helped. They're just out of love from the fact that they're from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. We should help them. Like sadaqah should be used, and they should be helped in other ways. Right? It's not ideal that they should have to be given from zakat. Okay? If there is no other wealth that can be used to support them, you can give them zakat, but generally you should try to help them from sadaqah. Okay? Non-Muslims, okay? You can give sadaqah to non-Muslims. Zakat is specific. It is taken from Muslims for Muslims. Okay? And then finally, we said it had to be given to an individual, so you cannot give zakat to an organization, you cannot give zakat to a masjid. Yes, they can be your means to deliver the zakat to the end recipient, but they cannot be the end recipient themselves. They cannot be the ones to actually consume the zakat. Okay, inshallah. We'll pause here. I'll take questions, inshallah.
There's a link on the video chat. So if you want to send questions, inshallah, there's a QR code that you can scan. Don't think it is vital, or the link, the clickable link is on the community group chat. You can also click that link and you can send your questions, inshallah. Mustafa prefers asking like the written questions.
Okay, there's some questions on here that I wouldn't address because I think they're asked earlier than when we addressed them. So for example, there's questions about not having liquidity that we spoke about. Okay. There's questions on 401k that we spoke about as well. Okay. There's a question on are zakat eligible recipients allowed to beg to strangers requesting zakat? I mean, it's as a community, it would be very sad on the entire community if somebody had to resort to this. As a community, we should be, every Jummah we like every day, every Jummah, every so often we come, like there should be a sadaqah box, there should be a zakat box, we should be donating money, and people in the community should come to the masjid if they're in financial need, and the masjid should have those funds to help such people. There shouldn't be a need that people should ever have to beg strangers to request zakat. There's questions on a housing loan. We talked about how up to 1 year worth of deductions you can subtract 1 year worth of expenses. I will mention that if somebody has a conventional mortgage, a ribawi loan, a riba-based loan, one, it's haram, it's impermissible. They should refinance and get Islamic financing. Second, because Islam doesn't even recognize, doesn't give riba any validity. A person can only, if a person has a home loan, conventional means, they can only subtract the principal amount that needs to be paid up to 1 year. They cannot subtract the interest payments. They can only subtract the principal payments that are due, not interest payments. If a person has a conventional loan, but a person should refinance and come out of it.
Not even escrow? Not even escrow? Payments have the principal, interest, and then escrow.
Yeah. I mean, a person can subtract, if a person is putting in money in an escrow for, that to cover their principal payments, interest payments, property payments, and so on. The property payments, the property taxes, the home payments, the principal amount of it is fine. but the interest portion cannot be subtracted because it's not a valid expense really Islamically to begin with. Okay? People ask about, there are some questions on donations to children's education, masjid construction, and so on. Again, if a person makes donations, that's fine, but you cannot give zakat toward masjid construction. If a person donated money for their children's education, in this, and I'm not sure what that means like, but if they've gifted money to their children, for example. Okay? So if a person says, I'm going to create an account for my children. Okay? A lot of times people do this, they'll say, I'm going to create an account for my child. If you've created that account for your child and you've put money in it, there's two possibilities. Either you have put that money in there with the intention that I'm going to use this money for my child, but this money still belongs to me though. In that case, you have to give zakat because it's still your money. The other scenario is you say, I'm going to put money in this account, and this money now belongs to my child. And once they're fiscally responsible, they can use it, but this money now belongs to my child. If you gift the money over and now the money, your intention is the money belongs to your child, then you don't have to give zakat on that because it's no longer yours. But remember, if it really is that you're saying this money now belongs to my child, then that child, when they grow up and they're fiscally responsible, can take that money and do with it as they wish because it's their ownership. So if you open up an account for your child's education, you say, well, this money's for my child and it's for their college purposes. That child wants to take that money and buy a car. You can advise them on is it a good use of their finances or not, but technically it would be their ownership and they can do with it as they wish. Okay, and most people, they'll say, no, it's for my child, but then if you say, well, can the child use it any way they want? They'll say, no. This is meant for their education, this is meant for their marriage, and so on. Okay? So just note why, if you're truly giving it to them or not. Okay? There's a question on potential income. A tax refund, you don't have to give zakat on a tax refund unless it's until you actually receive it. Okay? Can you give zakat to multiple organizations over a period of a few weeks? You can, but just remember your zakat is unpaid, it's unfulfilled until all of it has been paid. Okay? So if a person passes away before they got a chance to give all of their zakat, they'll pass away in a state where part of their fard is now unfulfilled. You have to make sure somebody's aware that this had to be paid on your behalf. Okay? There's a question on 401k we answered. Okay. Donations to the masjid are not zakat. You should help the masjid, donate to the masjid, but that's sadaqah. That is not zakat. Okay. Is zakat amount calculated based on the assets you had a year ago, or when you're doing the calculation? Again, remember, you calculate zakat today. Like if your zakat date is today, it's as of today. Doesn't matter what it was yesterday. It is as of today. If a person has a gold wedding ring, is it a zakatable asset? Yes, it is a zakatable asset. Okay, you will take its value within your zakatable assets. Okay, so for gold, any gold and silver that you have, you take its scrap value as part of your zakatable assets. Now, if a person had bought an asset, they bought cryptocurrency or such, and they lost money, they've lost a lot of money on it. Again, you calculate zakat as of today. So if you bought cryptocurrency that was worth, 20,000 and now it's worth 16,000, it's what's the value of it today. Can a person give zakat to their wife's family if they're not Muslim? Again, we talked about you can only give zakat to Muslims. Okay, but generally you can give zakat assuming if they were Muslim, you can give zakat to your in-laws. So, for example, a person can't give zakat to their mother, but they can give zakat to their mother-in-law. Okay? Person can't give zakat to their son, but they can give their zakat to their daughter-in-law. Okay? Assuming the daughter-in-law is eligible as well. Assuming that mother-in-law is eligible, you can give the in-law. You can't give your own direct ascendants and descendants. Okay? But obviously they have to be Muslim. There's questions about if somebody some liquidity related questions. again, that if a person, like if a wife, she doesn't have income, does she still have to give zakat? Again, if she has the amount of wealth that makes her liable to give zakat, then she has to give zakat. The fact that she's not working doesn't remove that obligation. Okay? It's an important, just Islamic, and this is a separate discussion, like, just Islamic financial mindset and so on. Not to get into it in detail, but just for the purposes that is relevant to zakat. Know that money isn't meant to sit just to sit idle. Okay? Money isn't meant to sit idle. Like, there'll be inflation. There's the value of that will go, the value of money will go down. You'll pay zakat on it. Your overall assets will go down. Money isn't meant to sit idle. Like, if a person has money, it's meant to be invested. Okay? It's meant to be invested. Okay? Whether in businesses, whether in stocks, whether in gold, whether in whatever you want, but money really should be invested. It shouldn't just be sitting idle. So if a person, says, I have this amount of money, but I'm not working, so I don't have an income stream necessarily. And if I give zakat, then every year my total assets are going to keep going down. Yes, they will, right? But you're not supposed to just sit on that wealth without investing it. I mean, that's not a zakat issue. That's more of a, you need better financial management issue. It's not a zakat issue. What age do kids start to pay zakat? Zakat, just like salah and sawm and hajj, becomes a fard on somebody the moment they reach bulugh, the moment they reach puberty. Okay, that's the Islamic point when a person is considered as an adult and accountable in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So from that point is when they're considered accountable, and then of course they have to have the amount of money to be liable and so on. We already talked about wife paying zakat to the husband. Again, the wife could be financially stable and the husband could be zakat eligible, okay? But the wife cannot give zakat to the husband. Okay? Should zakat be calculated monthly or yearly? Zakat is an annual obligation. Okay, so every year, and according to the lunar calendar, every year. All right, I think that is most of the questions on here. Okay.
I had a question here, but then show up, I guess.
Oh, go ahead.
My question was that the 401k or Roth IRA, do we calculate the amount which is there, or how much will we get if we take it out today?
So the question on, if a person has an investment like 401k or Roth IRA, again, you're going to look at how much money you have today. Okay? You're not going to factor in future expenses or potential expenses. Right? So you're going to look at how much money you have today. So if you have a person has $100,000 today in their 401k, that full $100,000 is working for them, right? Like, all of that money is invested, all of that money is being used to generate, inshallah, more income, right? All of that money is working for that person. There's no amount of the 100,000 that is sitting in a separate, bucket somewhere for taxes, where only 80,000 is actually invested and 20,000 sitting for taxes, for example, or for penalties or such. That entire wealth is working for them. Okay? So that is your ownership today. That is your wealth. And that's where you're going to give zakat on. You're not going to subtract future expenses or potential expenses. Okay? So the question is on a loan receivable. So we mentioned that you do include loan receivables, like debt receivables. So you gave a loan to somebody. As long as you're expecting to be paid back, you will include that within your zakatable assets. But if you've lost hope that they're going to pay you, then you do not have to give zakat on that money anymore. Okay. I think just one last question and then we'll end. Gee?
Buy the house, there is money payment facility. So if he saving her for here, then to buy the house, so 2 years.
Yeah, I remember we also talked about one of the questions around like somebody who is saving money to buy something. Remember we said that one of the invalid subtractions is that money that you have set aside for some noble purpose. We said you set aside some money because you want to buy a house, because you want to get married, because you want to go for Hajj. These are all fine, but you still own that money. That is still your money. That is still your assets. That's still your ownership. So you will calculate zakat on that. You're not going to subtract that from your assets. Okay? So, pause. The question's on, is there an online zakat calculator? So I'll answer that in two ways. One is yes, I think you'll find some of these online. I don't know if this masjid has one, but like Masjid Dar es Salaam, for example, they have a zakat calculator, if you will, where you can put in your information and it'll help you do a calculation. Okay? That said, I also want to stress that the actual zakat calculation is actually not that difficult. And we had a shorter session. Like I've done this session where we had like another, let's say, 45 minutes or so, where I actually run through scenarios of the scenario where you have business inventory and so on, this scenario where you have 401k investments, this scenario where all these complicated scenarios, and everyone who sat through what you just sat through is able to do all those calculations, right? This, alhamdulillah, like it's certain principles. Once you know them, you can do the calculation. This isn't like where we need TurboTax to like figure out our taxes. Okay, this is a lot simpler, and you can do it. So yes, you can use some of these online calculators for help, for validation, just to be sure. But because it is a fard, right, it's best for us just to also just get comfortable in doing it as well ourselves. Yeah. Right. So I want to say Jazakumullah khairan again for the masjid, for inviting me, for all of you for your attendance, and because your du'as may Allah accept. Subhanahu wa bihamdihi, subhanahu wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
For taking your time for us. If Hadram would like to speak about organization representing, but before that, I just wanted to give a disclaimer on behalf of the sub that this whole program was not, sub doesn't work with the organization. He's not encouraging you to donate to a specific organization. This phone call will go through the organization.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I just wanted to let you know about the Zakat Nikah was an organization, collect and distribute the card. Individuals who are Zakat eligible. There are rules of this. Like men, brothers and sisters, right? So on your way out,